Hello, friends. This is Mike Williams. Now that film and video analyst Paul Jansen has watched Peter Jackson's Get Back documentary, he is back to offer his insights and observations. And so without further ado, here's the interview with Paul, and thanks for listening. Well, everybody, Paul Jansen is back with us, and I'm sure this will probably be our last discussion on Peter Jackson's Get Back. I've done a lot of talking about it, and Paul is back for the second time, and I'm going to ask Paul to take us through his impressions of the documentary, which was almost 8 hours in length, and we also have some screen captures that Paul will take us through. And so, Paul, welcome back. And the first thing I wanted to ask you is, what were your overall impressions of Get Back?
Well, for let's say for a non-fan like me, I'm just an observer, a casual observer. It's like you already said, it's way too long, especially if you consider that every song is covered during the rehearsals multiple times. You could say, well, it's for the fans. It's nice to see how the song develops from an idea to a final version. But I think the increments that they show are very too much and very with little change. Or it's basically what Michael Lindsay Hawk at one point in the time says during one of the episodes. There isn't any story.
Right.
And basically that's the impression I get from the whole documentary. There isn't any story other than the fact that George leaves halfway through, or let's say in the first week. There isn't any major progression in the storytelling. It's just a rehearsal, repetition of songs, goofing about, and then the rooftop. That's basically, in 3 words, the sequence and what they showed us. And to cover that in 8 hours or almost 8 hours of film is maybe a little bit on the too much for a normal viewer. But okay, that's the choice Peter made. I think Peter Jackson did it in that amount of time to give the fans as much as they would like. And in that point of view, you could say, okay, they got what they wanted. So
yeah, I did find the episodes at many points to drag on, and it was very repetitive.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is I agree with your assessment. And like you said, Peter did what he did because, well, he wasn't playing to you and me, right? He was playing to the overall audience out there, right?
Yeah.
So now the other question I wanted to ask you is about the deep fake or the CGI. Now, you and I talked about this, the possibility of Peter going there. Now, I have said that I believe Peter had to use artificial intelligence in order to restore the film.
Yeah.
But I also mentioned when I did my part 3 commentary that I did not spend any time trying to decipher whether something was deep fake or not. And the reason for that is because the deep fake technology is so good these days. And I point to that one TikTok channel that I had in my presentation.
Yes.
Is Peter Jackson revising Beatle history? And that goes back to August of this year, where this guy does a deep fake of Tom Cruise, and there's simply no way, especially myself as a layperson, could distinguish whether that's really Tom Cruise or not. So I figured, let me just watch the 8 hours without worrying about deep fake or CGI, and let's just take it in at that level. So what was your impression? Did you approach it the same way, or did you pick up certain things?
Well, the overall thing we can say is that it's similar to what Peter Jackson tells us, that the AI they use was purely for image enhancement, grain reducement. The original film grain is completely removed almost from the shots. The sharpness has been enhanced on some images that I'm still questioning of whether it was real or not. If you make a shot from something up close to the camera and something in the rear is also sharp, in the way that lenses have been used and the sharpness of your aperture can be used to create sharpness in one shot. Some of the scenes, not much, but some of them are questionable. But overall, my view is that they only use the enhancement for AI for enhancement, but not per se for creating stuff that wasn't there in the first place. On the other hand, as you said, the Tom Cruise shots, and also nowadays is available on open source stuff you can download simply on your telephone, where you upload a still image and you get moving images of action figures in action movies, etc., with your face on pasted on the actor of the particular movie. It's such a high level that it's almost impossible to check images like Peter shows us here to verify if AI has been used. It's almost impossible. But there are 2 instances in our talk. Hopefully, this we can cover that I'm very suspicious of, that AI has been used for more than simply enhancement. But we come to that later.
Okay, so let's get started, Paul, with slide number 1.
It's a capture from one of the media presentations Peter Jackson did. This one is from 60 Minutes, and he tells about how he was approached by Apple to talk about artificial intelligence, etc. And he asked what happened to the Beatle film reels of the Get Back documentary, and he was given access to these archives. And interesting is that the vault where he's been shown going into is vault number 3. So the number 3 is interesting. But then they show us him browsing through film cans. And one of the film cans that is shown is the one that we have this capture of. And what he said was that the films were never shown before. And obviously that would be meaning the general public. Film can A reads 1,200 feet of film. 1,200 feet is 33 minutes of film. 400 feet of film is 11 minutes of film. So we have here total 6 reels of film of 400 feet. So added up, that is 66 minutes of film in one can. Peter Jackson says he uses 55 hours of film. So that would mean if every can would contain the same amount of film as this one, they only would need 50 cans of film. But in the shot that Peter enters this vault, we see way more than 50 cans of film. But the vault that he's walking through is obviously showing way more than 50 cans of film. So it's made an impression to be something huge, a huge vault where he's walking through. It could be that the vault has more films than only the Peter Jackson or than only the Get Back session. I thought it's a little bit misleading. But the other thing that what I would like to mention is that the cans are barcoded. And the barcode is something that has been invented or was commonly used only in mid-70s. So this film, this can, is already being processed in whatever way. And the barcode makes it possible for an inventory, for a listing, for probably they have been scanned already. That's something that maybe points to the fact that already they were processed, they were scanned, they were maybe edited, reworked, whatever. It's not like they found the original unprocessed film back from the 60s. It's already been processed in whatever way. One of the other things that he also mentions in this interview is that he tells us that one of the ways that Michael Lindsay Hogg was able to capture the discussions between the Beatles without them knowing that they were filmed is that the cameraman, they kept the cameras rolling for 10 minutes straight and leave the camera on and walked away. So the Beatles would have the impression that they were not being filmed, which is an idiotic statement. No cameraman would leave his camera running without him being added. You will not leave your camera running. It's not the way it works. I understand what he's trying to convey to us. He's trying to tell us that Michael Lindsay Hogg used covert techniques to capture sound and images of the Beatles.
Yeah, basically hidden camera, hidden audio.
Yeah.
So he's trying to make it sound like the Beatles are being very frank and they weren't playing to the camera. That is what it sounds like Peter is trying to tell us. Now, Paul, when you say that the cameraman would not leave the camera, why wouldn't they do that? Why wouldn't they just turn it on and then walk away?
Well, it's something you just don't do. It's your film might get stuck. Something might go wrong. Maybe your focus is not on the person you want to focus on. So almost all the shots that we see being used in the film, you always see that the camera is being focused or being directed onto the players in the scene. So if he makes a shot of George or John, you always see that the camera is being pointed to them. It's not like they use a general shot and leave the camera running for 10 minutes straight. It's not how it happens. But I understand that Peter makes that statement just to give the ordinary viewer the idea of, they were secretly being filmed.
Right.
It's not like it happened.
All right. Did you want me to move to the next slide?
Yeah, I go to the next slide.
Okay.
It shows the overall view of the Twickenham session. The boys sitting in the middle of a sort of a half dome set with these typical colors of the green, magenta, and whatever red. It's very much, for me, it tells us that the documentary style will be a style where everything will be shown outside of the bandstand. So indeed, they tell us beforehand that the documentary will show more. It's not per se that this is wrong, but it's the way they present us from day one, that they will show more than only the four Beatles. If we go to the next slide, we see this typical shot of the Beatles in that setting, where a lot of stuff is going on beside the Beatles. There's a guy walking through the frame. We see the other crew members sitting at their equipment. So they very much show us, let's say that's a typical technical term, breaking the fourth wall. So you show more than the scene itself. It's deconstructing the scene. That's sort of the intro to the full documentary.
So it's basically giving it the impression of this raw, what you see is what you get, and if that includes the periphery of the studio, that's what you're going to get. You're not going to just get the four Beatles. You're going to get everything, the environment that's all around them.
And what they are doing by that is sort of implicate that what we're about to see is real, is the truth. It's not only nicely shot, nicely framed. No, you get the whole picture. So they tell us beforehand what you are about to see is what really happened.
Yeah, it's like filming a family get-together, right? And you have a bunch of company there, and it's not going to just be about Susie. You know, Susie has all her friends there, so everybody's going to come into the picture, right?
You're going to see all of it. And that's sort of illustrated by these first two slides.
Very interesting. Next slide.
The next slide, number 4. After George's song "I Me Mine," he asked the boys if the lyrics are correct. He uses a term, freer flowing than wine. And he asks if the superlative of the adjective free is indeed freer. And then Billy quips, freer, like sticky out ears.
Like stick out ears?
Like sticky out ears.
Okay.
So my suggestion is that sticky out ears is a synonym or a nickname for original Paul. Paul is known for his sticky out ears.
Well, that's interesting you should bring that up, because in the original memoirs going back to 2009, in the book, it's said that Paul, biological Paul, had monkey ears.
Yeah.
And I remember having a conversation, an email conversation with Tom going back, must be about 4 years ago now, and mentioned to him that was kind of an interesting, if not unusual way to describe biological Paul McCartney. Subsequent to that, it was taken out of memoirs.
Hmm.
I thought it was not in good taste for Billy to describe biological Paul that way.
Yeah.
I mean, the ears you have are the ears you're born with. It's not like Paul asked for those ears, right? So the sticking out ears that you're talking about would correlate to what was put in the original memoirs about Paul having monkey ears, is what I'm saying.
I'm not sure about the American expression for a kid with sticky out ears. If that's a nickname often used by English speaking people. In Holland, obviously, we have nicknames for people with sticky out ears. So it's common to harass people in a funny way with their ears. But for Billy to do it in this way, in this moment, using a phrase from George, free, the word free, and then turn it into freer, like sticky out ears, is, in my view, a very sick joke. He refers to Paul, the original Paul, with sticky out ears, and free would then imply dead. Free like dead Paul. That's my interpretation. It's a very covert, sick joke. And in that sense, it's also masterfully spoken.
It would be like an inside joke, right?
Inside joke. A normal viewer would only think that if already they knew what he meant, he was referring to his own eyes, him being Paul McCartney. But for us, the one in the know, also a little bit in the know, we know that he means something completely different. He refers to the dead Paul, the original Paul. In my view, this is, I don't know. I was very upset when I heard it for the first time, and I almost projected all of the things that we talk about Billy playing the role of Paul, and then him making this joke is in very bad taste.
There were a number of moments, Paul, during the documentary when there are comments and conversation that takes place that really only makes sense once you know the conspiracy.
Yeah.
If you don't know about the conspiracy, then it's going to go right over your head. One of the examples that I talked about when I did my commentary on Peter's film is the scene where they have the hidden camera conversation and they're talking about George leaving and looking to have him come back into the band. And in that conversation, they're talking about when John relinquished leadership of the band.
Yes.
And it passed to Billy.
Yeah.
Now, to somebody who only knows the official narrative, that would be kind of an unusual dialogue to have, because the official narrative says that the band began and always was John Lennon's band. He was the de facto leader of the Beatles. That's the official narrative.
Yeah.
So in Peter's documentary, when we get that scene with the audio and they're talking about the transition of band leadership,
yeah,
that makes perfect sense when you understand what took place.
Yeah.
The true story. When John relinquished the band and passed the baton to Billy. Because Billy taking control of the Beatles was one of his demands.
Yeah, when he took over.
So your point about the sticking out ears and then this dialogue that I just talked about where they're talking about the transition of band leadership, these discussions only make sense once you understand the conspiracy.
Yeah, and for the normal viewer, it doesn't matter.
Right.
They probably cannot see the logic of the discussion or the inside joke, but it doesn't matter. They just see it as a passing by of words, a casual remark. And therein lies sort of how do you say it? The amount of dialogue we get is enormous. So one or two sentences that only make sense for the ones who realize how things are sort of covered by so many dialogue and so many words that for the casual observer, it drowns in the total. It drowns in the sea of scenes in the sea of dialogue.
Yeah, it just gets kind of lost in the sauce.
Exactly. And so Peter Jackson, he gets away with that. For the casual viewer, they don't mind. They will not protest. They will not write critical letters to the newspaper.
There was another scene, Paul, now that we're talking about it, that was very, very weird, and it only makes sense when you understand the conspiracy, is when they were sitting together, and it was John and Billy basically talking to each other, but there were others there from the entourage that was around them during the studio. And I don't know if you recall this, but John starts to recite the lyrics to Yesterday, and then Billy mentions the number 9.
Yeah.
And then Billy then mentions Canyons of the Mind, which is a Bonzo song, and Vivian Stanshall.
Yeah.
And between John and Billy, they're going back and forth with this very odd dialogue. And it's like you just said, if you don't know about the conspiracy, it just kind of gets lost and it just sounds like gibberish, or I don't really know what they're talking about. So that's okay. But when you know the conspiracy,
then it makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, you know?
Yeah.
So, Paul, the slide we're looking at now, you have a yellow arrow pointing down, and I think I know where you're going here. So why don't you tell the audience what you observed?
The moment is when they're playing Maxwell Silver Hammer. And the thing is, in the rest of the Twickenham sessions, George is sitting playing on the platform, the drum platform of Ringo, but not in this instance. He is playing, sitting on a chair next to Mel Evans, who was banging the anvil. So, but his Gibson is lying on a cushion on top of this platform, and by Ringo's drumming, the guitar slides off the cushion and falls with a big bang on the floor. This is so typical of all sessions with the guys. They never use a guitar stand. Never. Not in the Twickenham session and not in the Apple session. And what we see here is a result of that. Leaving your guitar like that, and small things can happen. And now it's a very expensive Gibson Les Paul crashing on the floor. I thought it was so typical of the style of how these guys use their instruments, how they treat their whole session of recording with a lot of nonchalance. And that's sort of the atmosphere that is exemplified by this crashing.
Now, that's something I noticed too. Now, even if they didn't have guitar stands, what used to happen when we rehearsed is that we would lean the guitar up against the corner of the amplifier to make sure that it was steady.
Exactly.
Right? So it would be standing up. What I noticed, I did see the scene where the Les Paul hit the ground and I groaned. And I thought, ugh. There were plenty of scenes where you see their guitars lying, like you said, on the floor.
On the floor. Who does that? Yeah.
So the problem with that, folks, you might say, well, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is if you're walking in the studio and you're not paying attention and you step on that guitar neck, you're going to crack it. That's the big deal. There's
one shot in my series with George Martin talking to Billy. And he's sitting between the acoustic of Billy and another electric guitar. And just in such a position that when George Martin makes one wrong step, he's going to crash the guitar.
Yeah.
Exactly. And like I mentioned earlier, that in my view, but that's my opinion, you never leave a guitar lying on the floor. Resting it to an amp, at an amp or to a podium, okay, but not flat lying on the floor. It's very dangerous.
Well, like I said, somebody steps on that guitar and breaks the neck. That's that.
That's that. It's a few $1,000 down the drain. Okay, but it's sort of it's nice that they captured it, that the falling of the Gibson, but it's also typical of the whole atmosphere, the whole attitude of the boys and working in the studio and making the recording.
There was another scene with George. I don't know if you remember this, but I remember it very clearly, where he goes to get up and he knocks his microphone right to the floor. At first, I thought he was going to bend over and pick it up, but he doesn't. He went to he grabbed something else, and he just left the microphone there and broke for lunch or something.
Yeah.
It was just another scene where you thought, wow.
Yeah.
Lack of care for the instruments and the equipment.
And later on, we will see, or maybe I don't know if you want to connect directly to it. It's the smoking of the boys over their instruments. And I've included some shots of, if we go there.
This is slide 18, yeah.
Slide 18, we see George lighting up his cigarette with a match. And we see the boys, all of them smoke. And in fact, not only all of the boys. Everybody in the documentary is smoking. Everybody. The only exception is maybe Heather Eastman, the kid of 6, who doesn't smoke. Everybody else is smoking. You could say that's typical of the 1960s, but there's another thing to it. Especially the Beatles themselves, they smoke over their instruments. You see Ringo smoking over his drum kit. You see George smoking constantly, and this example is just one example. But then more, I think, not so good is Ringo. Is when he's playing Octopus's Garden, he leaves a smoking cigarette on top of the lid of the Blüthner piano. And also Billy Preston is leaving smoking cigarette on his Fender Rhodes, where there's ashtrays all over the place. So them not using these trays. Why leave your burning cigarette on top of an instrument? How stupid is that?
Billy Preston with his cigarette by the Fender Rhodes. And then I have this image up, Paul, where it's a burning cigarette creeping up on
the lyrics.
I'm assuming lyrics. It's unbelievable.
You could say, well, that's rock and roll. But really, I mean...
Not when you set the studio on fire.
But I think it's more of a lack of common sense, a little bad attitude. They are the how would you say it? They are the Beatles. They can command people around. Hey Mel, get us some cigarettes. Hey Mel, can you get me some shoes size 8? Stuff like that. I don't think it's a nice approach of the boys how they behave themselves, and the cigarettes is just an aspect of that. Let's put it like.
Well, the thing too is, folks might say, "Oh, so what? So they're smoking while they're playing." But yeah, it's not a problem if you're smoking while you're playing. I had a friend of mine that was a guitar player many years ago, Mark, and he used to smoke and play, but you don't do it around tape.
Exactly.
Right, because there are toxins and there's residue from, cigarette smoke that could very well wind up on the tape. And you don't want to do that. Now, I guess, if you're a bar band someplace, you don't care. That's fine. But considering this is the Beatles in Apple Studio, you would think that more care would be given, especially with George Martin being in attendance, because George, he's a top shelf producer, and I was surprised that all the smoking was going on, and he didn't step in and say, "Hey, there's too much smoke in the control room, boys," or too much smoke making its way into the control room.
But you see, Glenn Johns is also chain smoking, so it's not only that the boys, when they are listening to playback in the control room, are smoking, but Glenn Johns himself is constantly smoking. So. I believe George Martin also smokes, so it's all of them.
Yeah, he does smoke.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I didn't see him smoking in the control room.
Exactly.
In fact, I'm trying to remember if I saw any of them smoking in the control room.
Yes, many.
Okay,
but now here's the thing. Billy, he doesn't inhale. Now for cigars, that's normal.
Right.
But for cigarettes, you don't smoke cigarettes just to puff about. Billy acts like he smokes. He doesn't smoke. And I watched some other interviews, newsreels, whatever. If you see him with a cigarette, you only see him puff, but you don't see him inhale. Another thing, if there was the suggestion of him inhaling, they make a cut. I watched a sequence where Billy is smoking in the Apple sessions, and you see him taking a drag on a cigarette. And once you take a drag, you would see the inhaling of the smoke, but they make a cut and they show Billy Preston or George or whoever. Peter Jackson excludes it from his scenes. I thought it's very interesting. So we clearly see Billy smoking but not real. He's acting as if he smokes. Very telling. Maybe it's interesting to go to the scenes of the shots of Billy and Linda in close-up.
All right, so there's Billy. This is slide 7.
Yeah, slide 7. I think he was telling about George left the band, and this is in the morning. John is late, so there's only 2 of the band left, and he makes the remark, and then there were 2, and a few seconds later he starts. What I see is just staring in the distance, but his eyes seem to water up. In my opinion, the watery eyes are added CGI. And this could be done very easily, in my opinion. This is just a little added with a little, almost like Photoshop. Just add an extra eye glittering, how do you say it in English, an eye glow. And you have a person who seems to have watery eyes. It fits the scene, and it adds the drama. So if Peter Jackson has done this, I'm not sure. In my idea, it would be very easy to do so. It's just an observation.
Okay, so Peter may have put a little CGI in here to add a little emotional effect.
Yes. And following that is the next shot of Linda when Billy is playing The Long and Winding Road, which is obviously a very, how do you say it in English, a very emotional song. It's a slow song. It's maybe a song that he already played to her, or demos of that. I'm not sure. We see a close-up of Linda, and Linda is lit in such a very cinematic way. It's almost impossible that it happened by chance. In the studio, in the area where they are sitting, let's say, backstage, and the lamps are not directed to that space in the studio. So her face catching that light in this way, and while she's listening, we see her left eye glowing up. Apparently, it's supposed to have a light. One of the lights is turned up or is rotated.
Her left eye?
Her left eye.
Yeah.
You see an extra glow coming up, and you see glittering in her eye. And it just fits the lyrics of The Long and Winding Road, obviously very, very, very much. And in my view, also, this is added later on.
Okay. The thing I noticed about Linda during the documentary, Paul, is that it almost looked like I mentioned this before we got started, in the old way of talking about things, airbrushed.
Yeah, I think they could have used more, how do you say it, skin smoothing effect on her face, just to give her an even more nicer look in relation to the rest of the restoration of the images. So her face would then be maybe softened a little bit, and maybe her eyes would indeed, like I suggested here, get an extra glitter. She has a hair light in this shot, which is also very Hollywood style, 1930s, the typical beauty shot of an actress, the leading star of a film. It's almost like this. And yeah, maybe they did their best on enhancing her beauty in these shots.
Like a filter. I'm noticing the top of her head, we have this kind of this light at the top of her head here, and then we've got the light here on the left-hand side of her face where it's lit up more. Yeah. So, yeah, I agree with you that there was some enhancements definitely done to the images of Linda when she was in the scenes. That was my impression, too.
I'm not saying it's wrong. I mean, she looks very beautiful in these shots, but if it's real, I'm not sure. We can only guess. For visuals, they did their best on giving her the best possible look in the documentary. Okay. After the Twickenham sessions, we go to the Apple studio, the basement studio. Do you want to talk about this shot in the street with the accordion player? I remember from my own youth, I'm from the mid-60s, so I remember that in the early 70s, street musicians, blind street musicians were Well, you could see now and again you would see street musicians, but he playing accordion with a sign on it where it says partly blind. It's by chance that they filmed this guy, but on the other hand, Peter Jackson leaves this image in his documentary. It's not adding extra information other than we know that we are driving through Savile Row. I thought it's a nice clue, if it is a clue, that we are partly blind.
It could be. Like I mentioned, he opened up episode 1, 5 minutes in, with a scene from Yellow Submarine, or a frame, I should say, of the scene where there's two Pauls in the Yellow Submarine film. And that was obviously a Paul is dead clue. So that was 5 minutes into episode 1. So I do believe that he did indeed drop little clues here and there with regard to the conspiracy. So partly blind. Yeah, could it be that this guy's partly blind? Yeah, it could be. But why is it in the film? You know?
Exactly.
Right.
For you and me, it's a kind of an interesting image.
Yeah, it has possibilities. Where'd you want to go next?
Yeah, you want to talk about the two Apple scrubs, the two girls? I think it was very much staged. And I come to that later on with the image I sent you yesterday, a montage of 3 shots where the girls are visible, but also a girl in a fur coat. So this image would lead to that second image.
Okay, let me go there.
Yeah, is that interesting? Okay, the next slide. And it has to do with the fact that on Monday, when the guys are first going into the Apple studios, it is said that no cameras were allowed inside the building. But this shot is obviously filmed from within the building, and these two girls are shown. So mentally, you tie this shot back to the interview with the two girls when they're waiting for the Beatles to arrive. And it's my opinion that the two girls are being interviewed, but the girl in the fur coat is also in the shot, but she's in 3 shots. A shot from inside, which is the main shot, and the second shot is when George arrives and steps into the building, and the third shot is when there seemed to be a random street sign shot of the Savile Row, and there the girl in the fur coat is also passing through the shot. It's too much of a coincidence to be random. So I would argue this is staged.
Okay, so you're saying that the Apple scrubs, the 2 gals down here in the black jackets, they're essentially props, right?
Yeah.
They're meant to be there. And then we have this lady in the fur coat. So we have this is obviously being shot from inside the building, like you said, and they said there was no cameras inside the building, right?
Yeah. People could argue, well, yeah, this shot filmed from inside is from later on in the sessions. It's, I believe, on Wednesday or Thursday in that week that we see the boys arrive. So you could say, oh, well, it's a few days later. It's later than the Monday on which cameras weren't allowed. But then my point is, why is the lady in the fur coat also in the shot that is meant to be taken on Monday? So we have 3 shots with a girl in a fur coat, and obviously it seems very much staged.
And let me make sure I understand what you're saying, Paul. And it's not on the same day, or we're being led to believe it's not on the same day?
It's shown that it is on different days. So the shot where George is entering the building is supposed to be on the Monday, the first Monday in the Apple studio. When George arrives, we see the guys arrive, and then we see a text in the frame which says cameras are not allowed. And already there, the 2 Apple scrubs are in the scene, but also the girl in the fur coat. And the girl in the fur coat comes back later on in the shots which are being filmed a few days later.
Okay.
And you could say, yeah, well, she's also a fan. Is it true or not? We don't know. But my eye caught it, and I thought, well, if you make a random shot of a Savile Row street sign, how great are the chances that the same girl is walking in the shot? Savile Row is, as we know, a very high-class shopping street with tailors, the typical London Savile Row clothes companies, tailors. So it's very high class. So a girl in a fur coat would underline that a little bit. So if they would need, let's say, extras to fill the shot with some people, then this is a possibility.
And just so folks know who are not familiar, Apple scrubs basically are groupies.
Groupies, fans, yeah. In the interview they do with the girls, they ask why they're here and what they would like to see, etc. And one of the girls answers, "We'd like to see a show," so that also projects to what we later are about to see. But interesting is that when John arrives in his Rolls-Royce limousine, and he, together with Yoko, passes the girls and walks downstairs to the basement, the outside entrance of the basement, the girls hardly look at John. They almost stand there like extras, and they watch the cameraman, and they almost have a look like, "Is this okay?" So you sort of feel that they are staged there. That this is choreographed. You girls stand over there, and when John arrives, you give him a look, and etc. So it seems like it's scripted. Then the next shot, and now it's becoming interesting, I guess. The shot of Glyn Johns' console. What we know about the console is that it's the studio setup of this guy, Magic Alex. Magic Alex supposedly has installed the studio with a setup. But interestingly, the setup is being tested by Glyn Johns and George Harrison. And they found that everything is not okay.
Right.
And then Glyn Johns sends an SOS to George Martin, and Martin and his EMI crew install EMI equipment to get the recording booth set up correct. And they use 2 4-track consoles, and they feed this signal into George Harrison's 8-track recorder. And I thought this is interesting. The first thing is George deciding to return is on a Wednesday, I believe. And on the next day, Thursday, George and Glyn Johns inspect the studio. So the decision for George to go back, or they have this talk in George's estate. We see this, the shot of his estate. It's decided that George comes back, and the next day already, there is a studio set up in the Apple building. How is that possible? If George would have said, "No, I'm not coming back," or if maybe it was decided, well, we just continue in the Twickenham studio. So this Magic Alex guy has one day to set up a studio in the Apple basement, and already the next day, Glyn Johns and George Harrison disapprove of it. Very strange, because what we know later in the sessions, we see how much time Glyn Johns needs to get the audio correct, to get all the microphones dialed in, to the whole discussion about microphones being everywhere, and where's our PA, and why don't we hang the PA speakers on the ceiling, etc. So the setup of the studio of the EMI guys, when George Martin gets to the rescue, it takes from Friday to Monday, working through the weekend, to get the setup correct. And then when they guys really enter the studio on this typical Monday, what we talked about earlier, the studio is still not up to snuff, because Tuesday, the day after, we see the piano tuner, we see equipment being brought in, we see the ladders of the ceiling lights, the Leslie speaker is being brought in, the Fender Rhodes is being brought in. So everything needed to get the studio set up, it takes more than something like 5 days in total. So the whole Magic Alex story seems very strange, that he was able to get working studio in 1 day time. Very strange.
Yeah, the actual moving of the equipment, the setting up of it, some of it seemed very off to me as well, Paul. What stuck out with me was the relocating of the equipment from the studio to the rooftop.
Yes.
That was a lot of work.
Yes.
To get done. And the impression you get in the film is, well, they finished up rehearsal on the 29th of January, And then on the 30th, late in the morning, they were ready to go. So the first question I had was, well, who broke down all the equipment?
Exactly.
And rerouted all of the cabling, hooked everything up back up on the rooftop? I don't know. To me, it just seems kind of weird. Now, my friend who's the sound engineer said that it's possible if they had a number of assistants, several assistants to help them to break everything down and to rehook everything up. So I'm not going to say it's impossible, because you just can't say that. But it just seemed to me like an awful lot of time had to be taken to get everything reconnected and tested and to make sure that it worked.
If you go to slide number 12, we see a shot of the cables coming out of the console. Between the console and the speakers in the console room, there's all this cabling. It's one big spaghetti of cables.
Yep.
That's all from the microphone signal cables from the basement studio. So all of this has to be unplugged, cleaned up, and then all the cables coming from the rooftop down to the basement recording booth had to be plugged in. Everything had to be labeled. So you have what you said about having to snake 75 feet of cable from the rooftop.
At least. Yeah.
At least.
It's 5 stories between the basement and the rooftop.
So you can only do that if you label it up front. You would say mic 1, mic 2, mic 3, drums 1, drums 2, etc. So you have to label it to be able to tell at the rooftop and in the basement which cable goes to where. Otherwise, you would be busy all morning signal testing your cables, and then afterwards have to plug it in at the real in the real station, real plug station.
I can tell you right now, I would not have wanted this job. I would have quit.
Yeah. So, but it's not only signal cables. All the equipment on the rooftop had power cables as well. So you have your power cables coming probably from the 4th floor, going up, hook up all your amps, your floodlights for the cameraman, your 12 volts feed for the cameras. There's a Nagra recorder also on top with the directional microphones. You have all this stuff had to be powered coming from the probably 4th floor, and then from the rooftop all the signal cables going down. Okay, it can be done possibly. I'm not sure in which time frame, but we know that the boys are still being recording on the Wednesday before.
Right.
Like you said, that Wednesday afternoon or maybe Wednesday evening late. I'm not sure which timeline. And then the next day, they're up on the roof, full up and running. Like you said, your sound engineer made the suggestion that a good recording engineer would be able to dial in very quickly the signals from a live recording.
The sound checks, yeah.
Yeah, the sound checks would not be even needed, or maybe rudimental, and the rest would be done at the console. But my point of view is when Clint Johns, obviously it's shown in the days when they are first in this basement studio. He almost needs 2 days and maybe more, because you made the remark that George Martin starts the discussion of the microphones giving a howling reverb because of the placement of the speakers.
The PA speakers, yeah.
Yeah, they need several days to get the sound right in the basement. Why wouldn't they need that much time on the rooftop? You could say, okay, give it a good few hours and we have a good sound check and we can go. But why didn't that happen in the basement studio? Why couldn't it be done there in just a few hours of signal check, sound check, and then let's go? No, the guys are messing about a few days of the PA speakers, the monitor speakers. But there's also monitor speakers on the rooftop. So wouldn't there be the same problem of a howling reverb? And what you said, it was a windy, cold day, so you have a wind influence picked up on your microphones. So all that would have been cleared in the few hours before the guys would start playing on the rooftop.
Yeah, there's a gap here that is unexplained. That's how I look at this, Paul. There's something missing in this. So
exactly.
the time that they left the studio and then the next day going up to the rooftop is a whole chunk of something that's missing here, that's not explained. It's the same thing with the decking on the roof, right? We talked about that in the first show that we did. And so we leave episode 2 with Billy up on the rooftop with Michael Lindsay Hogg. I think Ringo was there too. And they're talking about, well, yeah, maybe we could do something up here. But they also mentioned that they had to investigate and look into whether the roof can hold the equipment and the entourage and the weight of what will be up there when they played live. Peter's film never closes on that.
Exactly.
We just get to the rooftop scene and all the decking is on the roof and, you know, and then the cabling and all that stuff just magically appears.
It's all already a set. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It is, like I said, there's something as a piece of this, a chunk of this, that has been removed from the timeline and left unexplained.
Exactly.
That's just my take on it, you know?
And this ties into the next step. After the rooftop concert, we see the guys back in the console room listening to the playback. And then someone suggested, oh, why don't we finish the recordings here of the left of songs just this afternoon? Because they played around noon, the rooftop concert. And so the afternoon would then mean that they still had a few hours to do a recording. Obviously, that's nonsense. The whole exercise of unplugging the rooftop cables and replugging the basement cables would have to be done all over again. And then the dialing in of all your signals had to be done as well all over again. So for them to suggest that even is totally insane.
That's a good point because, as I mentioned, a lot of people believed, unless you watched the documentary, that the Get Back sessions, the Let It Be sessions, ended with the rooftop session, and it didn't. It went into January 31st the next day, which meant they would have had to break everything down again and reroute and reconnect everything for the sessions the very next day. Now, again, can it be done? I guess, yeah, anything can be done. If you have the right number of arms and legs to go get it done and they know what they're doing, sure. But I don't know. It just seems a little off.
Following on that, if you go to slide number 33, okay, we see this is the Friday. So after the rooftop concert, the whole studio has been changed. What we see here is that they no longer use the ceiling lights, which gave the Apple sessions this nice soft living room type of lighting and atmosphere. They chose to bring in spotlights on stands, and the black areas we see are what is called flags to direct your beams of light to specific places and other places you want to shadow. So they brought in extra lights, extra light stands, these flags. The whole setup of the studio is different than before. If you go to the next slide, number 34, it's a little bit better visible. Ringo is playing now on a platform without baffling. An interesting detail is over on the left of Michael Lindsay Hogg. All of a sudden there's a fire extinguisher mounted to the wall. That wasn't there before. So there's a lot of stuff in there that wasn't there in the previous recording sessions. These lamps and these cameras had to brought in. These lamps specifically, you could say, well, they had them in store. They just had to move them in. It doesn't work like that. If you have these lamps, usually this stuff is being rented. Basically, nobody has this stuff in store. Maybe in the Twickenham studios could be, I'm not sure, but it had to be brought in. It had to be hooked up. Usually these lamps require more or other sources of power with a higher voltage. In Europe, we usually work on 220 volts. Some of these lamps, I know, work on 380. So if you want to use 380, you have to bring in a generator. if these are really movie, how do you say it, movie type of lamps with, anyway, it's all new stuff brought in. The studio is set up differently. What I see, it looks to me like a few days have passed. This is not the next day. If the previous day was a rooftop concert and the next day was a recording session in the basement, these two images don't seem to line up. It's in timeline, it could be done, but you have to have made preparation beforehand to have all this stuff ready to go, enter this into the studio, make a logistic program that you bring in first, all the instruments, then the lighting equipment, then the cameras. It all seems very not fitting the timeline.
Yeah, it's a completely different configuration for sure. And the other thing I noticed, Paul, was as I was looking at this particular capture, to George's right, his right leg on our left, we see a different Rickenbacker bass as well.
Yeah.
This is not the Rick that was being shown by George Martin.
Exactly.
That's not the same bass. So now we have a brand new Rick has appeared in the scene. So, I mean, can somebody have brought in a different bass? Yeah, it
sure.
can. But like you said, when you take a look at the completely different configuration and so on, it's another scene where you're thinking to yourself, are we getting the full story here? Or again, are there gaps?
To me, it feels like a different session, way off in the timeline that it has been presented. I don't know. Like I say, everything is possible, and with the right people, you can do the right things. But if we look overall, this whole operation is very much not controlled, mismanaged. It starts off with the guys in the studio in the Twickenham session. Nobody knows what's happening. Even the Beatles are asking, what are you going to record our conversations? Nobody knows what's going on. The director, Michael Lindsay Hogg, hasn't got a clue what he will be filming. Halfway the session, he still has no clue. He still says, I have still no story.
Well, at Twickenham, they had no recording equipment. They had to bring in George Harrison's 8-track recorder.
Exactly. So the whole preparation wasn't there. Nobody knew what was going to happen. There wasn't any developed songs, so they say. But in the end, we know that there weren't, because they only played 4 new songs, 1 left over. And in the end, they only played 5 songs on the rooftop, and that took a month to prepare. So it's all mismanaged, misprepared. That's the whole atmosphere, at least that I get from this session.
Yeah, it was incredibly disorganized.
Yeah. So if disorganized, it's, let's say, the overall conception of the, observation of the session. It seems strange that all of a sudden they were able to bring in a complete and entire new studio setup with different lights, different cameras, instruments placed on different positions. It doesn't feel fitting to the situation.
Well, there's the different Rick right there.
Exactly.
That I was just talking about.
This shows obviously the misplaced strings coming off the nut of the neck of the bass. And then George Martin comes to the rescue. First, Mel comes to the rescue, and Billy explains. He says the nut is for a right-handed guitar. And this is supposed to be Billy's bass. And Billy is supposed to be a left-handed bass player. So he's complaining that the nut on the neck of his guitar is for a right-handed player. And in this shot alone, you can clearly see that the E and the A string are completely misplaced on the neck of the guitar. So indeed, they are coming loose of the nut.
Yeah, there's a couple of things with this, Paul, that don't make any sense. First of all, this is a lefty bass because the knobs are down here.
Yeah.
If this were a righty bass, the knobs would be up here.
Yeah.
And what's very interesting about this, like you said, the bass has 4 strings. So the top string is your low E, then you have your A, then you have your D, and then you have your G. Take a look at where the A string, this is the 3rd string right here, look where it's at. It's sitting right on top of the low E.
Yeah. It's almost like they're really coming loose off the neck of the guitar. They are completely misplaced. So he starts complaining to Mal, and he's explaining to Mal that this is a right-handed nut, and he can't play that. So he says the words, "I'm not keen on that." Well, there's no surprise. And then the next shot, slide number 24, George Martin comes to the rescue, and he's trying to explain, or at least Billy is explaining, that he doesn't know where these knobs are for.
I know, that was ridiculous. That was absurd. In fact, I have no idea why that was not edited out of the film.
Yeah, so you could say, well, Billy wasn't used to playing that bass. Okay, but all Beatle fans know that this Rickenbacker was Paul's bass of choice for his studio sessions since 1964, I believe, or 65, I'm not sure. So all the fans would know this, and they now see Billy explaining to George Martin that he doesn't know where these knobs are for. How ridiculous is that?
Very ridiculous, because it's very simple. There are 2 volume knobs and 2 tone knobs, and then there is a pickup selector. That's it, Billy. It doesn't get much more simpler than that. So that whole dialogue was completely contrived.
Exactly. So then you could say, at least you and I, is this a hidden clue, or is this just a plain out, right in your face, open clue to us that Billy doesn't know how to play Rickenbacker bass, so Billy is not Paul McCartney? Well, we obviously know that already, but it shows here very clearly.
Yeah, it was very, very weird,
that
entire scene. And the other thing, we talked about it before, you mentioned Mal Evans, who's depicted like he takes the short bus to school every morning. I felt bad for Mal because he was a gopher.
He was a gopher. Go get some ciggies. Go get some drinks.
Go type this up.
Yeah, George at one moment says, "Can you buy some size 8 black shoes? Because I don't go to shoe stores." I mean, totally absurd.
It was horrible. I felt bad for the guy.
Okay, but also the whole thing about coming back to the use of an anvil to create the sound of an anvil is also very strange. In one of the first days in the Twickenham session, Billy says, or John, I'm not sure who was it. He says, "Mal, we're gonna need an anvil and a hammer." And the next scene, they show us that indeed an anvil has been brought into the studio. But if you want to create the sound of an anvil, you don't have to bring in an anvil. Just bring in a hammer and a piece of steel, or you bang a hammer to a screwdriver, and you have the sound of metal being drummed.
I don't even know where you would go get one. If somebody said, "Go pick up an anvil," do I go to the Home Depot for that? Where do I go, to a hardware store? Where do you get an anvil from? Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about, you and I spoke about this earlier. Take a look at George Martin's. He's kneeling down by Billy. Look where the Fender 6 is.
Exactly. If he makes one wrong move, you have two guitars being killed.
Right.
I don't get it. And another thing is that what you mentioned, you could say, well, then rest your guitar to an amplifier.
Or a chair or something, yeah.
But there's another, not in my series, but there are clearly some shots where we can see that one of the guitars of Billy is resting to the Fender Rhodes of Billy Preston. And that also I find it strange. If you have a guitar with strings that can vibrate on their own, resting to the Rhodes, you get sort of a reverb, an unwanted reverb.
It resonates.
It resonates. So that also what I thought it was a strange thing to see. It follows the strangeness of microphone placements, and also if you maybe skip to scene number 22.
Yeah, before I go there, Paul, in a second, I just want to, again, I talked about the bleed through, right? So here's the PA on the far right. It's to George's right.
Yeah.
And that PA is cutting across the microphones for both amps for the guitar, is cutting right across the room.
Exactly.
And then that's the Leslie speaker in the back, which is in the corner. That's to the right of the PA, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another problem.
Yeah.
You fire up the Hammond organ through that Leslie speaker, and you're going to have the same problem, I think, that you would have if you are playing through that PA, which evidently they were, because in episode 3, that's when George Martin stepped into the studio and said the sound is all mucked up.
Yeah.
Because of the setup.
And the boys are complaining that they can't hear what they are playing.
Yes.
Then also Glyn Johns, of all people, has to tell the boys that their guitars are out of tune. And when it happens to Billy, it's interesting that that John and George start laughing at Billy that his guitar is out of tune. Almost like, hey, who's leading the band and whose guitar is now out of tune? They sort of taking the, how do you say it in English, taking the piss out of him. Was a very comical scene, illustrative of how all boys are not knowing what they're doing. And one of my, let's say, general observations regarding this is also that they are not in full control of their instrument. They are not, like, say, masters of their instrument. I mean,
no.
John and George can play a decent piece of guitar. Billy obviously isn't a real bass player. He plays his bass parts, but he's better at the piano. Let's say he excels at the piano. Ringo and Billy should be a rhythm section of the band, but they are not. In all the songs that we are seeing here, every time either John or Billy are telling Ringo how to play drum, it comes across as Ringo not being the best drummer they could have. And that ties in to the documentary or the remarks that George Martin and Billy had when they're discussing Ringo, that Ringo was not such a great drummer, and we sort of played around it.
Yeah. Well, Billy had said in that interview with George Martin that when they played live, of course Billy wasn't there, but he was saying that Ringo would speed up and stuff like that. Now, in all fairness, keeping perfect time, precision time as a drummer, I mean, the studio guys, can do that. The Beatles, like Ringo, John, George, I've said this, since I did my presentation, did the Beatles write all their own music? They are a bar band.
Yeah.
They are a bar and club band. So it's not that they can't play their instruments. It's that they are not studio quality musicians. And this is one of the things that my friend who's the sound engineer for almost 40 years, that he pointed out as he was watching this. He said that it was very clear that they were not studio players, with the exception of Billy. Now, he understands that Billy is naturally right-handed. And going to your point, Paul, about Billy's primary instruments are wind instruments and the piano.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you watch the old Bonzo videos with the songs, Billy's playing wind instruments.
Yeah.
And he's a very good piano player.
Yeah.
He's not an exceptional piano player, but he's very, very good. And this is by his own admission, by the way. He will tell you the same thing. In interviews, he'll say that.
Yeah.
So, in any case, like, this whole room looks like a mess.
Speaking about a mess, I have...
Yeah, we should go to the mess.
Yeah, we should go to the mess.
Because even, I think, Glyn Johns made a comment about...
After the first day, Glyn Johns makes a comment. He said...
Here it is, right here.
Yeah, he says the record...
Slide 16?
Yeah, slide 16 is the photographer's corner. But Glyn Johns makes the observation that the recording room looks like a pigsty.
Yes.
And that's only after one day of recording. So, but here we see we see the camera and the light meter and the camera bag, and we see the cartons of the films. If a photographer, he mirrors what he sees in the rest of the studio. But if you have a mess like this, can you produce quality stuff? I'm not sure.
Well, let's take a look. Here's another view.
It's a way of working. Yeah. This is after the Leslie, that's slide number 15. By the way, Mike.
This is when after the speaker got there,
yeah,
right?
After the speaker got out of the box, they just leave the box lying there in the studio. Don't clean up anything.
That's because Mal will clean it up.
Maybe they're thinking, well, Mel, you brought it in, you clean it up. I don't know. The other image is the number, what is that, 14, where the Fender Rhodes is being brought in. And you made an interesting point about the Rhodes being brought in before Billy Preston arrives.
Right.
So they already probably, most likely, knew that Billy Preston was going to be part of the band.
Yeah, because it showed up like a day or two before Billy just had a surprise visit at the studio. And I thought to myself, oh, give me a break.
Yeah.
That Fender Rhodes was brought in because they knew he was showing up.
Of course. In these kinds of things, nothing will be left to chance.
The other thing, too, is during the 8 hours, I think I heard Billy Preston say 2 or 3 words.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it was as if you were watching a silent movie.
Very strange.
He just smiled a lot.
Yeah, you smiled a lot.
Played beautifully.
Oh, well, wonderful. I mean, that's sort of what the Beatles themselves say, and George Martin also, I believe, that once Billy Preston arrives, the whole dynamic of the recording session
picked up tremendously.
All of a sudden, the guys are inspired to play better, to develop their songs better. Everything sort of gels together after Billy Preston enters. So maybe this wasn't just a surprise.
No, and I would bet that Billy Preston has played with them before. I mean, as far as session work, as an uncredited musician.
Probably.
They go back to the story, well, he knew them back from the Hamburg days. And I thought, well, he did. But I was thinking to myself as I was watching this, I'll bet some of the keyboard and piano work that we hear on Beatle records was Billy Preston. That was my thought.
Yeah.
And I do not think that he just popped in because that Fender Rhodes showed up right in time.
It would have looked nice if he would have arrived and then a day later they brought in the Fender Rhodes. Then it would make sense. But now his instrument comes in before himself, so it looks very strange.
Hey, look, I think without Billy Preston, I said this, I seriously doubt they would have gotten anything done.
Yeah.
He put a lot of structure behind the songs.
Especially, yeah. And there was a moment where they are playing, I believe George Harrison is at the piano, and he's trying to find some chords. And then Billy Preston says, no, it's an A chord, it's an E chord with an A, or an E chord with a C, something like that. And then you see George Harrison looking, oh, really? So they sort of have a nice communication about finding the right chords to the song. One of the few moments indeed that Billy Preston making conversation. Yeah.
We have a picture here of Heather and
either that one, Heather, or the one where George is enjoying milk and cookies and whiskey and wine. I was emphasizing the fact that in this shot with Linda and Heather and the other girl whose name I'm not sure of, you see very clearly a bottle of J&B Scotch.
This is kind of a weird mix. You have J&B, bottle of milk.
A bottle of milk, a bottle of wine, and cookies. So you could say milk and cookies and J&B and wine.
The session of champions.
Drinking on the job.
It's just not appetizing. I mean, just to look at the whole mix here, especially with the milk.
It's but also in some of the other shots you see the roadie Kevin Harrington pouring a white wine, etc. I think it's strange to emphasize that in the environment of your workplace. Okay, you could say they are already smoking, so why not show them drinking? But at one point, John is complaining that his voice going sour and that he's feeling tired. Well, no surprise there. If you're boozing up and smoking all the time, it's not very contributing to your quality of voice.
Well, especially if you're going to go into the studio for 30 days and sing and sing and sing and sing, you do run the risk unless you are a professional singer. Billy knows how to use his diaphragm.
Yeah.
I don't think George or John had voice lessons.
Oh.
The possibility that you can strain your voice.
Yeah.
And become hoarse and all that is highly probable. So
go to the 27, George Martin. There is a hidden booth, and that's you could flip between 27 and 28. There is a hidden booth with a camera in the lobby of the building. And at one point in time, we see George Martin entering the building, and he smiles like this to the camera. I describe it as Duper's delight. He definitely knows what's going on, and he can't hide his face, him knowing what's going on and showing us. And the next slide, number 28, we see the policeman coming back from the roof. So this is number 28 is after the concert, but we see clearly now this recording or this camera booth, which is strange because this shot is made from the lobby with a camera. So the camera is not in the booth, it's outside the booth. So the point of having a booth is non-valid in the first place in this shot. But anyway, the officers coming back from the roof, I think it was all a setup. The police were in on it. They probably got a message, indeed, call in from complaints of the businesses in the neighborhood. They say, what's this racket all about? And so the police enter, but I think they were in on it. And I saw an interview with one of the police officers, the young one, the somewhat taller one, explaining nowadays, so that's now 50 years later, he's still alive, this guy. He's telling that there was no intention of arrests being made. He was just trying to get the volume of the noise down. But probably, or maybe likely, he was instructed, go up to the Apple building, make some noise, make some strong voice, and make an appearance. And in anticipating that, the production made this camera booth in the lobby. I mean, it's all set up. It's clearly visible in these two shots. I mean, I don't know what else can be told about it.
Right. Yeah, you can even see the light up above, right?
Yeah, they brought in extra light for the camera to have a good lighting setup to work from.
Yeah.
Who would do that if you're not expecting anyone?
Yeah, if it's supposed to be spontaneous and it's supposed to be, like a reality TV show. Well, we know reality TV shows are scripted, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, this is a typical aspect of all being planned out and scripted. Shots can be maybe the ones from the rooftop. The 29 is the first setup. You see the monitor speakers standing vertically, so upright. And later on, we see during the concert itself that they're lying down. And you made an interesting remark about the monitor speakers lying down, giving not the correct feedback to the players of their sound, of their instruments. I thought it's very interesting that it clearly shows in these two images.
Yeah, the playback monitors, you want them to be angled facing you.
Yeah.
As the band, especially for the singers, so that they can hear themselves. If you can't hear yourself when you're singing, when you're playing live, then there's the possibility that, you could wind up singing a little sharp, a little flat, and so on.
Exactly.
And they took these speakers here. These are the ones with the black backs. At one point, right here they are upright, but then they lay them down on their sides. And so the point I was making when I did my part 3 review is when you lay them down, the sound is actually shooting across, below your kneecaps.
Exactly.
Can you hear yourself? Yeah, you can hear yourself, but not as well if the speakers were angled properly so that the sound was coming up towards your ears. Some people might say it's a minor point. That's fine. I get it. And then they have 2 PA speakers, one on the left, to the far left, and one to the right that's leaning up against the rail.
Yeah.
And that's playing out to the crowd.
Yeah.
So as soon as that started playing, what would happen is, because you're playing into a city street, you're going to get reverberation off the buildings and the windows and stuff like that. And I was wondering, how are they able to get a clean vocal sound with that echoing effect in the background?
Yeah.
Because, what would happen is you would get this delayed effect coming back at you.
Exactly.
And so, again, it's just one of those situations when I looked at the setup, I was just scratching my head.
Yeah, it's very strange. one of the smaller details which you can see in this shot is the setup of the cameras, the camera crew, also the floodlights that they have to use because it was expected to be a cloudy day, and the film stock they used was I read up on this. It was very interesting. They used 100 ISO film stock, but corrected for tungsten light. If to use it outside, you have to use a correcting filter to get your color balance correct. But the correcting filter eats up 1/3 stop of light. So what you end up is with a 64 ISO film sensitivity. And to make up for that, they brought in these floodlights, and you can see them laying next to the camera crew, wrapped in cellophane to protect them for possibly the typical English rain or something. So that's interesting to see how it's all being set up here. Also of notice is that in the background you see these vertical stands with these red grips on top of them. These are camera stands. No, sorry, light stands, but they weren't used. Later on in the other shots, you see that they have been placed farther backwards in the set. Then maybe interesting to see. Well, the shot number 31 is John and Billy playing, and Ringo also. But you see the size of the amplifier speakers, and the roadie, Kevin Harrington, has made an interview somewhere where he told about how these speakers were not able to be moved upstairs, and they had to break open a skylight to hoist them to the rooftop. But if these a bass speaker generally is something like 100 pounds or so, so to hoist that up with a rope through a skylight, interesting. Nice job of these guys to get it up there.
Well, these bass bottoms here, I mean, I used to have an old Ampeg V4. That thing weighed a ton. And mine wasn't even a bass amp. Mine was a regular guitar amplifier.
Yeah.
So these are very, very heavy. And the Fender Rhodes itself is not a light instrument. I used to play a Fender Rhodes going back many years ago. So, yeah, I heard, too, that they had to take it through the skylight. And I guess it's the skylight right behind Ringo.
If you look in the rear of, let's say, beneath this concrete slab, there is a white plane, somewhat tilted. I couldn't find it earlier, but I checked on it. After the concert, the guys leave the roof and they go down the stairs. And in one of these shots, you see that this white plane tilted towards the wall is in fact one of the skylights that's standing open.
The one that's right behind the amplifier?
Yeah, exactly. It's right behind the amplifier. And if you go to shot number 32, we have a shot from the back of the band, and you see the entire skylight, this typical half-domed shape of a skylight. But the one that's standing open is not visible, just not, very unfortunately, but anyway.
You can see the actual lighting that Michael Lindsay Hogg was using to the right.
Yeah, exactly. And also what the boys, in fact, were looking at is the skyline of London, but without any audience other than their own girlfriends and a camera crew. And this was one of the points that I believe George or John, I don't know who, it was discussed very often about doing a concert, but in the end, a concert without audience. And this is then what the band were playing for, the skyline of London.
Yeah, it was George who said, I don't really want to play on the roof. And he didn't say it, but the point he was making was, why?
Yeah.
Who are we playing to?
Who are playing, yeah.
And that's a good question. So that, what that says, I think, is it was something that was done for cinematic effect. It was something that would go down into Beatle lore as if it was some magnificent moment in their timeline, when in fact, like you and I discussed when we first got onto the show, at the end of the day, they played 5 songs on the rooftop.
Exactly.
30 days in the studio, it wound up being 5 songs.
Yeah. The whole idea of Michael Lindsay Hogg to make it a large theatrical performance in Libya, in the old amphitheater, and we sail in English fans and make it a large spectacle. That was a very grand idea, but in the end it turned out to this bleak little show without audience. It's a very strange counterpoint almost in the type of discussion.
Yeah, they missed the objective tremendously.
Yeah.
Like the original objective was to write, record 14 original songs, get that done in 2 weeks so they could do a live show.
Yeah.
Perform live at an amphitheater out in Libya. At least that was one of the proposed sites. To 30 days banging around the studio, doing a lot of cover songs, winding up on the roof of your recording studio and playing 5 songs.
Yeah. Almost as if in lieu of an alternative, well, then we go up to the roof. I mean, it's not fitting the whole image of the Beatles, this grandiose, the greatest rock and roll band ever. I mean, those were the words that everybody uses in those days and even now. And then looking at this, and then it's only 5 songs and added up 13 minutes of total playing time if you leave out the extra takes. It's a very bleak underachievement almost.
Yeah, absolutely it is. That's what I had said in my commentary videos. I wasn't trying to be funny and I wasn't trying to knock them, but what I was doing was comparing what they ended up with versus what they started with. What was the original objective and where did they land? So it's an underachievement.
The quote that the cameras get from the street, people in the street, is also stressing this. One of the men said, "It's a bloody stupid place to have a concert." One of the others says about hearing them in the streets. He says, "Yeah, well, we'd also like to see them." I can't see it makes sense. One of the women says, "Why is it up on the roof with all the money they got?"
Right.
A very strong point. It's not befitting their status.
Paul, maybe at the end of the day, considering where the band was at, maybe this is all they were capable of.
This was the best they could do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's give that some thought.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to put them on some lofty pedestal, but at the end of the day, this was it.
Yeah. Yeah, in that respect, it's sort of it's very telling for which direction they were headed. I mean, that they broke up very shortly after is was not a big surprise.
No.
But in one of the quotes I got from, let me see if I can find it. Yes. In one of the first day in the Apple studio, when everybody's still walking about, and George Harrison is talking to George Martin. And they're talking about how's your business going or something to that effect. And then George says, "Hasn't it disintegrated like ours?" So he's talking to George Martin and he's referring to ours as being the Beatles is disintegrating. So already then during the sessions, they have, at least George Harrison has this feeling of, well, this is sort of the last thing we are doing and then we put an end to it. I thought it was very telling that in these little discussions, almost very clearly visible, you could almost taste it that this was the last thing they would do. And then, also, like you already said, going into the sessions, George wasn't into it. He came back from the session in New York, where we had a very pleasant playtime with Bob Dylan's band, and then he came back to the winter of discontent, as he called it. And Ringo, in the first week, he was totally bored out of his head. He didn't feel like it. John was goofing about just to get his head off the. It's very telling that the only person willing to do this with 100% was Billy.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, when Billy was having the discussion in the studio, and I think it was Michael Lindsay Hogg that asked him. Well, they were all having a discussion, I should say, and then Billy was quiet. And Michael Lindsay Hogg asked him, "Hey, what's on your mind? What are you thinking about?" And Billy's talking about, well, where do we go from here? What's the future look like? And the other 3 Beatles are sitting in the room and nobody says anything. And that was very telling to me because what they were saying through their silence is there is nothing after this, Bill.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And in fact, John quit the band. I think it was August of 1969. So, 8 or 9 months later, he was out.
Yeah.
And Billy threw in the towel, I think, in April of 1970. So, but the question I wanted to ask you, Paul, is, did you get the impression when all was said and done that Peter was trying to revise Beatle history to put a happy face on a period of time that wasn't so happy for them? What were your impressions?
If that was the objective, I think he could have gotten that result by cutting it very much shorter. In fact, what he did, the clues that we already discussed today, the dropping clues of Billy, but also the telling clues of where the band was in terms of was there any future left. If the objective of Peter Jackson was to show us a happy band with a nice rooftop result, he could have left out all this, let's say, negative stuff, but he kept it in. So in my view, this, let's say, negative tendency of the band coming to a close, coming to an end, is indeed left in the documentary. So it's for a keen viewer, you could see this already presented in this documentary. And for the happy viewer, who thinks that this is all glory, Beatles are still the greatest rock and roll band ever, and this was just their most recent project, they probably will not notice these little negative tendencies that we pick up on.
Right.
Well, so I think Peter Jackson made a very clever end result for everyone who wants to see what he wants to see. And in that respect, he did a good job. But from my view, as let's say a non Beatle fanboy, I say it's way too long. And if you want to present a happy band, then you could have left many repetition, especially if a song goes wrong in a repetition, all the stuff that several takes, Glenn Jones complaining that the take is not correct, etc. They could have left all that stuff out, and then you would end up with something like 2.5 hours maybe of documentary with the development of the songs, with the result of the rooftop concert. And then you could have included all the happy stuff with Heather singing and dancing, and maybe the shrieking with Yoko. It could all have been included and make it a total happy atmosphere. But Peter Jackson left all the negative stuff in. So I don't think he's retelling, or how do you say it, revising history. But he's giving it a twist for everybody to find in this documentary what they are looking for. And in that respect, I think it's very cleverly done.
Well, I was actually quite pleased that he did drop some of the conspiracy clues in the documentary.
Yeah.
That's what we were talking about before. If you're familiar with the conspiracy, especially if you are familiar with what Memoirs tells us, then there were a number of moments when you picked up on it and you knew exactly what they were talking about.
Yeah.
So he had a little bit of something for everybody in a way.
Yeah, exactly. But overall, I would say it's way too long. And he could have included those clues or those truths also if he would have sliced it up somewhat shorter. On the other hand, I can imagine that Disney was very pleased to be able to show almost 8 hours of stuff. So it's all then in the end it's all in a commercial situation where they just say, well, just go and make 3 episodes. And but for in viewing time, it was way too long, and especially if, like you and me, we're trying to look for some peculiarities or truth drop or other strange stuff. It's very long. It's a long watch.
Yeah, and the one thing that I put Peter on the hook for is he did not present or have any kind of discussion about the fact that the Beatles abandoned the sessions.
Yeah.
In other words, they didn't think enough of the sessions to really do anything with. So they originally handed the tapes off to Glenn Johns, and then it wound up with Phil Spector.
Yeah.
And so the argument's going to be, and I know what the argument is. Some people have already made the argument with me. They're going to say, well, Mike, this was all about the footage that they had for the 30-day period of time. Okay, I understand that. But Peter called it a documentary.
Yeah.
And if it's really going to be a documentary, then you need to document the full story. And he, in my opinion, he left off a chunk of it, which was very important, which was they were dissatisfied with what came out of it, and then they handed the tapes off first to Glenn Johns and then to Phil Spector to do something with it, and they walked away from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, that's just my view.
Oh no, I think it's very interesting because the opinions go all over the place. Whether the original versions or the Phil Spector versions are the better ones, and who was responsible for what and who thought about what. But what he did do, so he could have included the Phil Spector discussion. He leads in with the old images of the Beatles. So let's say the happy days of the Beatles.
Right.
Some of the first 5 minutes or something in episode 1 is just a lead in to this documentary with old images. So why not lead out the documentary with what happened to the recordings? How were they processed to the result we all know? How was Billy's alternative take, the naked versions? And what you said, he left out certain songs. So all that stuff that went on afterwards, Peter Jackson could have easily put it in to make at least the picture complete.
No, you're absolutely right, Paul. You're making an excellent point because he led into the documentary with footage and presentation that had nothing to do with what Michael Lindsay Hogg filmed.
Exactly.
He went back to the early days and took you through a timeline, but then he cut the timeline off at January 31st, 1969, and we know that the timeline went beyond that.
Yeah. Like you said, there were retakes of vocals, of drums. So these things are left out. In fact, what he also left out, in contrary to the earlier sessions, the Friday sessions, it's only shown what is, as they say, being the versions to be found on the records. So they only play the final versions. That, let's say, they show us the final version. And on the Friday, the outtakes, where Glenn Johns say, "Hey George, your guitar out of tune," are not shown. They're only showing us the final versions. So they make the Friday a real happy day with only successful takes. And so also here is a little bit of modifying of the images. They have been edited to a form of a conclusion. The conclusive Friday where everything was wrapped up and the album was completed. So,
and we know that's not true.
Yes. And so in that respect, you could say Jackson didn't make it complete as it should have been.
You and I are in agreement. Well, Paul, that was a fantastic discussion.
Was it?
No, it really was. It really was. I think it was very free flowing, and we just talked about stuff based upon our take on what we took away from the documentary from watching it. You know, we're not saying we're right. We're not saying we're wrong. We're just talking about our impressions.
Yeah.
You know, and you had some great insights. So, Paul, before we head out, though, there was one slide, one moment in the documentary that was very telling. And I had said that George was the one person that I felt was thinking logically through this whole thing,
Yeah.
and was really speaking from the heart. And so there was a moment when George talks about being yourself. Do you want to explain to the audience the dialogue that took place?
Before this, the boys go back to the days they were in India, and what their reason was going to the Maharishi, a spiritual session over there. George makes a remark about that it's the biggest joke to be yourself. And if you were really yourself, you wouldn't be any of who we are now. And then he gives this look to Billy when he takes a drag from his smoke. An almost killing look, in my view, to Billy. For the ones who know what's going on, this is, in my view, this is very obvious. He's almost killing Billy and Billy's persona and his role in the band with this one look. I think the words being yourself and what we know of who Billy is and what role he plays and the deception and the lies and everything that we know that the last 50 years have been presented to us is, for me, comes down to this image.
Yeah, because he's telling Billy, this is not real.
This is not real. I think, well, like you say, George is sort of the emotional heart of the band, if I can explain it like that. He always comes with the most sensitive remarks, also the most logical remarks. Why move up to Libya to have a concert? Who's going to pay for all this? It's always George who has the most sensible and logical remarks. But now here in this shot, in this scene, he talks fully from the heart, and he doesn't disguise it with secrets or with hidden second meanings, but just enough for us, you and I, to know what he means, and for an casual viewer to say, oh, well, look, he was making a smart remark. But you and I both know what he's meaning by this. And the look he gives Billy is, in my view, very telling.
I agree. Well, Paul, I think with that, we'll wrap it up. And I want to thank you for your time.
I can only say thank you very much for having me on the show. And I say goodbye. Have a nice New Year's Eve.
Same here, Paul. Thank you so much.